the greatest mystery of my life, the 1966 Michigan UFO flap. You know, in my life, I've had many, many mysterious things happen. There was the Oscoda image stone, and the laughing ghost to the farmhouse up north, and the day the Indian elders made us invisible. Any of these you can put keywords into the search engine here on YouTube and find my videos about them. But the number one spot goes to the 1966 Michigan UFO flap, and there are a couple of other videos here on my channel about those area events. But it's been 50 years this month, March, since the initial sightings, which last well into the early summer months. It was in March that they were first observed. It is the greatest mystery of my life, and one that even now, 50 years later, there is no logical explanation. I remember Dr. J. Allen Hynek suggesting that these sightings could have been caused by swamp gas, and most people at the time thought that this was quite absurd. Why should this matter to me after 50 years? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the big one is that I cited it also, and that most mysterious image has haunted my mind ever since. It was strange, it was out of place, it was something I didn't understand and don't understand, so it has occupied a great deal of my thought over the years, over the past 5 decades. Back in 2006, on the 40th anniversary, I prepared my own special postal commemorative sheets. I issued them under the authority of the Small Lake, Michigan Postal Authority, and I prepared 60 of them, affixed postage stamps, and took them to the post office in Bridgeport, Michigan, and had them hand-canceled, and then began selling them on eBay. I kept 6 for myself. Why cancel it at Bridgeport when most of the reported sightings were downstate? Good question. Because Bridgeport was where I had my sighting, only about a block from that very post office. But let me back up a little bit and give you the background information on these sightings, again, in March 1966. March, as I remember that year, was very unusual weather-wise. Temperatures were warmer than usual, and it seems that nearly every morning there was thick fog and little snowfall. There was a general feeling of uneasiness in the very atmosphere. And me? I was scared from the time I heard the first reports. I don't know why I seemed to have an unnatural fear of the objects that were being seen. The reports were everywhere, newspapers, radio, and even the news at the major television networks at their level. You younger viewers must try to understand what the world was like back then, because, as they say, it was as different as night and day. Now we have become accustomed to instant access to world events on the internet. In 1966, we had snail-paced access to the news, but it was, pretty great for us. We didn't know any better, so the evening paper and television at 6 and 6:30 evenings, and at 11 o'clock at night. These were our access to the news. Weekends, we didn't even have television news unless there was some major catastrophe. The war in Vietnam was in full swing. The newscasts were always filled with the real horror of the stories about that war. At my dad and mom's house on Shreve Drive in Bridgeport, we received 2 TV channels fairly clear, and one that was iffy. There was WNEM, which was an NBC affiliate back then, but is now the CBS affiliate of the area. ABC TV out of Flint, and there was a UHF channel also, which was the CBS affiliate, but I don't recall their call letters. I do remember that its studio had the reputation of having a hard, compacted dirt floor to run the big studio cameras on, and those studio cameras back then were monsters that were very, very heavy. Of course, we got the Saginaw News every single day, and that paints a little bit of an image of the world as it was in 1966. And as I said, this began in March that year, but they were not just, and these objects were seen by many, many witnesses, and not just ordinary citizens. Their stories were confirmed by well over 100 witnesses. One was a civil defense director named William Van Horn. Dozens of students watched the football-shaped object for hours as it maneuvered close by the University of Michigan campus, an airport, and a local swamp. The sightings of March 14th caused an uproar, and many people were in a panic, truly believing that Michigan was being invaded. And it might sound funny now, but when given the lack of access to news, the slower communication, it's not so hard to understand why people might have felt insular and isolated and invaded upon. Anyways, the feverish pitch of fear that I saw in the newscast put me into a horrible state that truly affected my life. 3 days later, on March 17th, two Washtenaw County Sheriff's deputies, Sergeant Neil Schneider and Deputy David Fitzpatrick, saw 3 or 4 red, white, and green circular objects near Milan, Michigan, about 4 o'clock a.m. March 20th saw more sightings by very reputable witnesses again. People were honestly afraid and began demanding answers of the Air Force as to what was flying around in our nighttime skies, because most of the sightings, well, not all of them, but most of them took place at night, making one wonder, are the aliens just hiding, or were they nocturnal, or are there aliens at all? My spirituality, my belief in Christ and the Bible indicates that there's not aliens, life forms out there. However, I saw what I saw, and it could be satanic deception, I don't know, but I saw what I saw, and it's still how do we want to say it? It still mystifies me after all these years. March, yeah, I already read that for you, but the Detroit News carried the police chase story the next day along with a now classic illustration of a craft that was football-shaped, had a quilted surface, had a dome, and antennae. Then Dexter patrolman Robert Honeywell said he spotted an object in the night sky around 9:30 to 9:45 p.m., and he reported that the object came close to the ground, hovered above a scout car, and was joined by a second object on its ascent. Now I'll get back to my story shortly, but it's important to know the background of all that was going on. Washtenaw County Sheriff Douglas Harvey ordered all available deputies to the scene. 6 patrol cars, 2 men in each, and 3 detectives surrounded the area. Officers actually gave chase to a flying object along Island Lake Road, but they never caught up to it. The Frank Manor family observed the lights from their farm on McGinnis Road. Mr. Manor was quoted as saying, "I got within 500 yards of that thing, and it looked pyramid-shaped to me. It had a light here and there and what looked like a porthole." And he continued, "It had a coral-like surface. I've trapped every hole in the county, and I've never seen anything like it." End quote. Manor had observed that it appeared to be about the length of a car and had a very hazy mist underneath of it as it hovered above the ground. 2 other members of the Manor family, son and wife, also observed the object. Now, Frank Manor also described that it rose to the treetops and then fell back down to the ground, repeatedly, I assume. And he also related that it changed colors, white on the ground, blue, and then red in the trees. And unlike other sightings, which were soundless, this one had a sound manner compared to that of a ricochet of a bullet, and like a siren at a real high frequency. Mrs. Manor put in a call to the police and was shortly joined by Police Chief Robert R. Taylor and Patrolman N.G. Lee. And Lee explained, "I thought it was an ambulance." End quote. Also on hand was 16-year-old Robert Taylor, who also saw the red vehicle in the sky around 10:30 p.m. He said it was going on in the east very slow, and then it sped up and went west. It was flashing red and white the whole time. End quote. Washtenaw County Deputy Sheriff Buford Bushrow also observed it. His comment was this: "It looked like an arc. It was round. We turned around and started following it through Dexter for 5 miles. It was headed west. We lost it in the trees. Either the lights went out or it took off with a tremendous burst of speed, end quote. Frank Manor was asked if it could have been a college prank, and he replied they couldn't rig any rigging to the object. He reasoned, and then he added there was not anything there and no way in the world to get out there. There were 2 scout cars on the hill and more at the house. Manor continued, I know every pothole in this county. I've never seen anything like it, end quote. On March 22nd, dozens of Dexter Hillsdale residents reported more UFOs, which were emitting strange sounds and lights. Then on March 23rd, a teenager from Monroe said that he took photos that looked like a big black blob when they were processed. The people of Michigan were truly, again, getting very scared, very edgy, almost panicky, and were demanding some sort of explanation from the government as to what it was that was going on, what they were seeing, what was flying about in our nighttime sky around the Great Lakes. Now, at that time, the Air Force was still conducting Project Blue Book. To repeat, at that time, the Air Force was still conducting Project Blue Book, and they sent in astronomer and UFO expert Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And he had a thankless job that he had to do, because he had to come up with an explanation to satisfy the people of the state of Michigan. And Hynek was the guy. He was an astronomer and a UFO expert. And what a detailed investigation he did. It lasted a mere 2 hours and 45 minutes. Not much time to dedicate to this. And when Hynek held a press conference at the Detroit Press Club, I believe it was at, he jumped from the frying pan and into the fire. He suggested the sightings were nothing more than swamp gas. Hynek was quoted as saying, the lights resemble tiny flames, sometimes seen right on the ground, and sometimes merely float above it. The flames go out in one place and suddenly appear in another place, giving the illusion of motion, the illusion of them being almost playful. The colors are sometimes yellow, sometimes red, and blue-green. Now, Hynek continued, marsh gas usually has no smell, but sounds like the popping explosion similar to that of a gas burner when it's igniting. The gas forms from decomposing vegetation, and it seems likely that as the present spring thaws came, the gases methane, hydrogen sulfide, and phosphine resulting from decomposition of organic materials were released, end quote. In later years, Hynek became a believer in UFOs and expressed his opinion that UFOs are indeed real and that he regretted his swamp gas analysis. Swamp gas was a crazy explanation, number one. Crazy explanation number two was his belief that youths were playing tricks with flares added to the panic. And of that photo taken by the teen back in March 17th, remember? He dismissed it as a time exposure of the moon and the planet Venus. No one's fears were quelled by the ridiculous explanations, and Van Horn, who had grew up on the edge of a swamp, was outraged by Hynek's findings. He was particularly resentful that Hynek ignored his and other reports, which clearly showed that they could not possibly have been swamp gas. To be fair to Dr. Hynek, he was being paid by the Air Force to hurry along an explanation. On short notice, swamp gas was the best that he could come up with. Now, on March 29th, more sightings were again reported over Michigan, and they were seen in Macomb, Oakland, Bad Axe, Flint, Ann Arbor, and if you had my sighting, Saginaw County. And so these were all on the list. The sightings in 1966 continued well into the summer, and is when my sighting took place. I don't recall the exact date, but I do remember that the night was very warm. The front door to our living room was open, with only a screen door being able to let a breeze in. My mother, Lorraine Cunningham Morrison, had her recliner right here by the door, and she could watch TV while looking outside at the same time. I also know that I was up fairly late for a school night as Mom, Dad, and Sister Roseanne and Bill were all in the living room watching Peyton Place, so that would place it after 9:30. I was sitting on the floor by my mom's recliner chair, sipping a cup of tea that she had made for me. My dad was a coffee drinker, but the rest of us were tea drinkers. Anyways, I was watching the TV and happened to look out where a large self-illuminated green oval shape was silently floating across the night sky at maybe just 25 to 45 miles an hour. It was moving from southeast and headed northwest towards Saginaw. Once again, I lived in Bridgeport. I was terrified, absolutely terrified, and I was speechless, and I could not move a muscle. I was frozen right in place. I so badly now, though, wish I could have said something to share that experience, someone who could speculate on what it was with me, or who was controlling it, and here I am 50 years later, knowing nothing more than I did that night. And even if no explanation were possible by telling the rest of my family, it would have been a really amazing experience to share with them. I watched it for what seemed forever, though in reality it was less than 2 minutes, a minuscule time which has left me wondering so long what it truly was, my one great regret. I can say this for sure. What I observed that night 50 years ago was not like anything I'd ever seen, nor have seen since. Who or what controlled that object, I will probably never know. Only about 2 or 3 weeks later, my friend John Mertz asked me to stay overnight at his house, and that was on a Friday night. We did the typical things boys do or did back then. We read comic books, had battles with our G.I. Joes, and beat up each other while we were wrestling. Then we got to talking about UFOs, and John lived with his mom on Airport Road, also in Bridgeport, maybe as far as 5 miles from my folks' house. And John told me that he and his mother, only a few weeks before, had seen a UFO just about hover above the street light about a quarter mile away. It would have coincided with the night that I saw the object floating through the sky, and it quite likely was the same object. But I thought at the time he was just trying to make fun of what I had seen. But he wasn't. He called his mother into the room, and she confirmed what she and John had actually seen. Now, while Michigan seemed like an epicenter, there were dramatic sightings all over the country. Something very strange was going on in 1966, and I regret that I'll never be able to know what it was. Well, thanks for joining me. God bless. And before we go, I'm going to show you some clips from a program that aired, I believe it was on CBS TV in 1966, titled UFOs, Friends, Foes, or Fantasy.